Howdy, leadership scholars. Welcome back to ALEC 617. All right, we are moving into module number 2. So you've got a pretty good snapshot of what organizational culture is, right? We've defined it. We've talked about the levels. We've talked about leaders' roles. We've talked about typologies. We've talked about how a leader changes and modifies and continues organizational culture. And I've sprinkled in a little bit of ethics here or there. But this module is really focusing on ethics and morals and the impact that it will have on you as a human, just thinking through that, and as a leader. And then just like I did with organizational culture, sprinkling in ethics, I'm going to sprinkle in a little bit of org culture as we talk about these ethical frames. And then our third module, again, is really the combination, how they work in tandem. So let me start with this. How do we define ethics and morals? I know some of you know this story, but I'm going to tell it to you again. I did not come into being an ethics professor by choice. It was by chance. I only took one philosophy course as an undergraduate student, and that was taught by a very old and crusty professor here at Texas A&M. And honestly, I didn't get a whole lot out of it because, philosophy is hard. And so I didn't know necessarily a whole lot about the theoretical, I call them isms, the theoretical underpinnings of ethics. So when I was interviewing for my job here at Texas A&M, one of the questions I got during my seminar was looking at our leadership curriculum, what are we missing? And what courses would you add to help our students be more well-rounded? And honestly, kind of offhand, I said, we need a course in ethics specifically for our undergraduates. And I said, it's because when we teach our students all these theories, we give them all these tools, right, to go out and make an impact. But we don't know if we are teaching them to be Jedi Knights or Sith Lords. If you're not a Star Wars person, we don't know if we're if we're training them to be a force for good or a force for evil, because they've got the tools to do both. I said, and we talk about ethics, but we really don't focus on ethics. It's kind of one of those, you get a question in a seminar, you give an answer, and you keep going. Well, I'd been back to A&M for just a few weeks, and my department head at the time came into my office and said, hey, remember when you said we should have an ethics class? I'm like, yeah, we totally should. He's like, cool, you should do that. And so that was the spring of 10, and I was charged with creating a course for fall of 2010. Yeah. So that was the first time I taught ethics. So I basically had to teach myself what is ethics and then how does it apply to leadership, which honestly, it's not a bad thing to have to do that, right? To teach is to learn twice. But really, I was a blank slate. So I didn't have any bad habits to overcome. I didn't have any prejudices to overcome. Like when I teach leadership theory, there are theories that I believe in, I love, and are my favorites. And there's some, honestly, that I think are crap on a cracker. Guess what? If I've got to cut something, I'm cutting those theories I don't like. So I didn't come in with any preconceived notions. So I had to teach myself ethics. So one of the things that I very first struggled with, honestly, was this idea of ethics and morals. We use those words so interchangeably as a society. And so I knew that they probably meant something different. As someone who studied teams, I knew that there's a difference between a team and a group, right? All teams are groups, but not all groups are teams. So I figured there was some kind of semantic difference between ethics and morals. So that's where I started. So looking at kind of what I found and what really helped me, when I looked at ethics, the first thing and the first person that kind of pops up when you talk about ethics is good old Socrates, right? Socrates, for those that are Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure fans. So Socrates was our original philosopher of ethics. He is noted by saying, Ethics truly is a philosophy. So if you look at those different philosophical types, morality and ethics are one of those. Metaphysics is one, right? This is axiology. There's lots of different types of philosophy, but ethics is one of those types. So Socrates said, we need to figure out the ought. So ethics is the ought of how we should live. How ought we do things? So as a philosopher, if you guys know, he wanted us as a race to figure out, a human race, to figure out what does right mean and what does wrong mean. And as a society, what does right mean and what does wrong mean? As leaders, what does right mean and what does wrong mean? So how Socrates did this is he truly engaged in the Socratic method, right? That's where we get this. And what he did was he gathered all of the young men of Athens down to this really interesting amphitheater that's underneath the Acropolis. So you've got the Parthenon on this big kind of mountainy thing, and then underneath it you have this. So this is what they now call Dionysus Amphitheater. This is me totally geeking out because I stood where Socrates stood. Oh my gosh. My poor husband was like, you are ridiculous. I'm like, I'm taking selfies. I'm doing the things. Because this is where ethics, the study of ethics was born, right here. And as he pulled people in, the Socratic method, if you've ever been taught that way, it is hugely frustrating for the learner because the instructor doesn't tell, they ask. So he would constantly say, again, how ought we live? And they would give an answer and he would say, why do you think that? What moral reasoning are you using? So he would utilize all these things to continually get them to ask questions. How ought the government govern? Do you think the government of Athens, Greece was happy with this guy who would bring all of these learned men together and basically be a rabble rouser? Heck no. So the government said, we are going to put you on trial for heresy, Socrates, because we believe that you are bad news. You are tainting the minds against the government of the men of Athens. And so he was found guilty. Now, what's interesting about Socrates' story is they let him go the last night before he was scheduled to die because there was a party going on in Athens because, you know, it's Athens. And so that's what they do. I can't remember I think it was some god's birthday or something they were celebrating. And so he started hanging out with his buddies again and he got drunk because, you know, there's a lot of wine in Athens. And he said, the government ought not to be able to decide my fate. That's up to the gods. It's not up to the government. And so all of his buddies are like egging him on. They're like, yeah, Socrates, that's right. The government sucks. Yeah. And he's like, so they shouldn't be able to decide my fate. I should be in charge of my fate. So he drank poison and killed himself. Congratulations, Socrates. You win. So it's a terrible ending. Now, I would love to tell you that is the only example of an ethical philosopher who has ended up taking his own life, and that is not true. There are a ton of them who unfortunately made that decision. And it's really, they think it's because if you sit around and think about the ought all day, right, there are no definitive answers. Ethics is the study of the gray. If our world was absolutely yes, no, right, wrong, then I would be out of a job, right? We would have amazing leaders that make perfect decisions all the time and no one would make mistakes or do anything dumb. Well, we know that's not real life, right? And so they really just kind of drive themselves crazy with that idea of the ought. So trying to figure out the ought, conceptualizing right or wrong, that is ethics. So I was like, okay, I get that. So I have a good friend who is a linguistics professor here at Texas A&M. And we were sitting around having a nice glass of bourbon one night when I was trying to figure this all out. And I said, man, I've got ethics. Like, I understand Socrates, all the things, right or wrong, but I'm really struggling trying to differentiate that between morality. And I had read the C.S. Lewis stuff, right? And what he says is, it's a little bit of head, it's a little bit of heart, it's a little bit of a divine person, it's a little bit of society. That's what helps us decide. I had read the stuff from the Heath brothers about your organs and which is the most ethical. Man, I was still confused. And she goes, well, that's silly. I was like, what do you mean it's silly? And she said, well, it's easy. I said, what do you mean it's easy? She said, well, they don't even come from the same language. And I said, wait, what? So my linguistics friend, who knows the root word for everything, I told her she should take the SAT just for fun now because she would kill it. But ethics is actually Greek. So the root word for ethics comes from the Greek word ethos. And ethos means character. So digging into that a little bit more, it's the individual character of a person or a group of people, right? But it's individual of the people. So your ethics, the Heath brothers are right. It is your head, your heart, and your gut. It is who you are. It is how you conceptualize right. It is how you conceptualize wrong. And all of those ideas are made up from our lived experiences. They're made up from our environment. They're made up for if you believe in a higher power. All of those things are subcultures, right? All of those things help guide us to decide what is right and what is wrong. So I tell people all the time, if you want to put your head on put your hand on the top of your head, put your hand on your heart, and put your hand on your gut. Ethics is there, and there. It's your head, your heart, and your gut. So when we talk about integrity, she also helps me with this, right? Because when we talk about ethics, a lot of times integrity is also a word that's used to define and describe ethics. So that is basically, right, what you're doing when no one else is watching, right? If you have high integrity, you're the same no matter what. So she told me that the root of that is integer. And for those who are mathletes out there, you know that an integer is a whole positive number. So when you think about it in that way, it is your holistic self, which means your thoughts, your values, your words, your actions. When all of those are congruent is when you have integrity. So that's your character. Now, what's interesting is leaders and leadership scholars have taken that and said, we're going to call that authentic leadership. That we want leaders whose words match their values, match their actions. So think about that from a leadership point of view, which seems so simple, like, duh, of course, that's the kind of leader we want. But think about that in the terms of what we talked about with organizational culture. When a leader is developing an organization, right? When you're looking at that culture, what's the first thing you do? Well, you establish your vision, your mission, your values, right? Those espoused values are the second level of organizational culture. They mean so much in organizational culture. Why shouldn't it mean so much as an individual? It should be part of who you are. So when she said that was my light bulb moment. I was like, okay, I get it now. Ethics is inside. It is what I think. And that is why my ethical frame can be so much different than the person next to me. Because they haven't had the same life experiences. They haven't had the same education. They haven't been raised in the same family. They haven't, all the things, right? They may have not seen the world through my eyes. And so because of that, we need to have discussions about what we think is right, because our collective thoughts on that are just so different because it is shades of gray and there's more than 50. Rim shot. All right, now ethics. Cool. Got it. I was excited. It may have been the bourbon. I don't know, but it was a good day. So then I said, all right, I get it now. Like light bulb moments. Aha. But what about morality? And she said, oh, silly. Morality is Latin, and it comes from the word moralis, and that means the relationship between human beings. So then I stopped and I thought, and I said, so morality is this idea that we interact with each other, right? It's the relationships. It is a collective decision by our culture of what is good. And I thought, okay, so ethics is internal, head, heart, gut, and morality is external to us. So if you want to put your arms out right now and do some spirit fingers right outside of us, or if you want to do finger guns, whatever you want to do, right outside. So ethics is inside. Morality is how your ethics affect other people. Dang. Again, light bulb moment. It was huge. So I started reading some other authors besides, my friend, to really kind of understand, again, the differences. And so Craig Johnson and, Pojman, I can't remember her first name, Pojman's textbook. And, I can see his face. He's got a really interesting one on leadership. It's a Mac something. McNaris, possibly. Dang it. Oh, shoot, my phone. Sorry. So there are lots of different authors that have noticed the same thing, right? And just said it in some different ways of the difference between the two. But I believe Thoreau and Craftsman's book. This is where I got this, where they had this table that I was like, yes, this is the table. So when you think of ethics, it again, like Socrates said, is that idea of right versus wrong. Then when we get to morality, it is good versus bad. So it is the consequence of the ethical decision. So in a lot of philosophy classes, when they talk about ethics, they do some ethical dilemmas. Now, let me tell you, an ethical dilemma is when we don't know the rightest right or the wrongest wrong or the goodest good or the baddest bad, right? When we're not sure, when it's not cut and dry. Ethical dilemmas are also when ethics and morals don't jive. So if you have something that is the wrong behavior, but it has good consequences, that's an ethical dilemma. So in philosophy classes, a lot of times they say, would you steal bread to feed your family? So stealing is wrong. Feeding your family is good. There is a TV show that you can still find sometimes it's on A&E of all random channels a lot. It was an offshoot of 2020 and it was called What Would You Do? And the host was John Quinones. You can find some clips on YouTube. It's really kind of amazing and awful at the same time. But what they do, it's a hidden camera show and they put people in ethical dilemmas. So they had one episode that they have a restaurant and you and your partner or whoever you're there with are not actors, but everyone else in the restaurant is. You just don't know it. And they have a couple that like get into a fight, like a real bad fight, to where you think the guy's about to hit the lady. And so there's all these hidden cameras and they're just sitting back watching, like, are you going to step in? Are you going to say something? Like, when do you step in? When do you say something? And so to me, watching that show was always the idea of, what is your idea of right behavior, right? What is your idea of wrong behavior? And then what is that makes you move, that makes you take action? And what makes you take action is actually whether you believe it's good or you believe it's bad, or society believes it's good or bad. So many times you may have a personal opinion about something, but let's say society thinks it's okay. So, abortion, right? For years and decades in the United States, you personally may have thought it was unethical. It was wrong to have an abortion. But our laws and our society, the majority of society said it's good. It's a good thing. It can be a good thing. So for you personally, it may have been an unethical action that society deemed as good. Now we know we've got some reversage of that. So it's interesting how ethical dilemmas can come about. So, when you're thinking about the application of this class, whether it's course assignments or whatever, you kind of have to think about, or your just life. The first step for a leader is to almost take a breath and take a step back and say, what are our ethics going on? And what are the morals going on? What has our culture? And so again, culture can be us as humans, us as Texans, us as Americans, but it can also be us as Aggies. It can be us as an organization. What does our organizational culture say is good? And especially from a leadership perspective, how am I perpetuating that? If I want ethical behavior, am I creating a moral environment to do it in? Do you see how this is working? Isn't this so cool? I mean, blew my mind. So let's talk about some different types of ethics. So a lot of times when we're kind of delineating this down, we've got descriptive ethics. And so this is talking about just describing what is normal individual behavior within the society. So looking at different cultures, I tell my students this all the time, and they don't believe me, but there are some indigenous tribes in the north. I don't believe in Alaska, but I think over in Greenland area now, that as a culture, it is ethical for when grandma and grandpa get too feeble to take care of themselves, that what you do, instead of putting them in the nursing home, which is what is considered right here, right in the United States most of the time, is they put grandma and grandpa in a canoe, right? And they just push them off into the ocean and they wave goodbye. Bye, grandma. Bye, grandpa. Hope you find your dad, right? And when I tell students that, they're like, no way, that's terrible. I'm like, no. The grandparents want to do that. They don't want to be a drain on their family. And so they're willing to make this happen. It's the right thing. It is normal in their society. So that is where morality and ethics combine, right? Because our ethics are absolutely influenced by morality. They are influenced by culture. So this is just the descriptive part. Normative ethics, looking at standard behavior. So looking at those different types of individual behavior, that character that is standard across culture. And that's really hard to find, which is really interesting. Meta ethics is trying to define things like truth, love, prosperity. What do those big words mean? And so from a constructivist point of view, if you guys have taken any type of research methodology, right? Those that are constructivist in nature, especially qualitative researchers, we truly believe that you construct your own truth. So my truth is little t, your truth is little t, big T truth is probably somewhere in between those two things, right? Because of perspective. But there are people that's what they study, is this idea of meta ethics, which is very interesting. Archaic ethics is virtue ethics. So it's the idea of values, virtue, and character. So you can see how archaic ethics cuts across individuals into culture when we talk about espoused beliefs and values, right? There are, of course, virtue ethics. We're not going to get into it in this class. Again, I'm like shoving a whole semester's worth of information into like a week worth of modules for you guys. But virtue ethics is still alive and well. People are trying to figure out what are those virtues. My favorite virtue ethics, I guess we'll call him a philosopher. He kind of has a list. Is Ben Franklin. Ben Franklin's got 13 of them, which is funny, right? Because 13 colonies. But he has 13 virtues, and he is absolutely the first to say, I do not adhere to most of these. Like, I am not a virtuous person, but I strive to be. So it's that idea of I strive to do the right thing, but knowing that ultimately he'll fail. It's very interesting. Now, deontological ethics. This is duty ethics. This is an umbrella term. So if I ask you in an assignment to identify somebody's moral lens, this is not an answer you should give, because this is a umbrella term that includes Kantianism, that includes, oh my heavens, of course, duty ethics, that includes, why am I drawing blank? I know these things like the back of my hand now. Dad, Reddit. Anyways, all the things that it means consequences don't matter. We're going to spend like a whole thing, like a whole, I want to say day. It's not really a day, is it? A whole topic talking about these non-consequentialist ethics. So it doesn't matter about the consequences. It's just about the principle. Right is right, wrong is wrong, period. Doesn't matter. Versus teleological ethics, which talks about the rightness or the wrongness is absolutely influenced by the goodness or the bad of the action. So most of us are teleological in our approach to life, because most of us are still at that life stage where we truly believe that the consequences matter. And sometimes we make our decisions based on if we're willing to accept the consequences that come. So this is going to be egoism, altruism, utilitarianism. Those are the kind of isms that we'll talk about. So again, those last two are umbrella terms. They're not actually isms. They're just umbrella terms to describe the different types of theories. Now, if you're not confused enough, there are some things, especially in organizations, that we treat as ethical or moral, but they're not. Let me show you. One of those is a religious principle. So all of these are principles. So this could be a religious teaching, considerations, revelations, divine authority. A higher power of some kind is telling us that this is the right behavior. So does it influence your ethics? 100%. Does it influence morality? 100%. Is it the same? Nope. And the reason why goes back to C.S. Lewis. It goes back to him struggling. Are we born with this stuff, or is it made? The whole idea of Lord of the Flies, right? Heck, even Lord of the Rings. What would you do in Lord of the Rings, which is based on a Greek mythology called Gyges' ring? But what would you do if you were invisible? If you could put on a ring and become invisible, how would that change what you did? Would that change your idea of right? Or would it change your idea of good based on that came from mythology, also a religious type of right, because it came from the gods. So Lord of the Flies is the same thing. If you don't have a structured society, are we naturally good people? And Lord of the Flies says no. Naturally, we are not that way. It's not a divine thing. Or what if the divine hasn't touched you, right? So does it influence? Yes. Is it the same? No. Legal principle. So a lot of people I don't know if we get them confused or we just want them to be the same. But there are actions out there that are legal yet immoral, like adultery, right? There's no law against adultery, but we know it is not ethical nor moral to do that act. But there are some laws that are immoral. So you could say, if you were a anti-abortionist, right? If you're pro-life, then you could say that before Roe versus Wade flipped, that if you got an abortion, it was legal, but it wasn't moral and it wasn't ethical for you. So we know that there is a differentiation between legal principles, moral principles, and ethical principles. So there is a dichotomy there sometimes. We wish in a perfect world they would work together, right? So we would have a better concept. But then there's principles of etiquette. Now, this is really important when we talk about organizational culture, because this is organizational culture norms. What we accept as okay behavior, what we accept as the right behavior, sometimes doesn't have anything to do with ethics or morals. It's more of a principle of etiquette, like holding doors for people. If you've ever been on campus, right, and you're walking far enough behind somebody to where you're not being awkward and in their space, and they open the door, and then it's that weird, like, do I hold the door for the person behind me? And then if you're the person behind you, you're like, do I run and try to catch the door? Right? It's that weird give and take. But that's a principle of etiquette. I also tell students all the time, and when I talk about ethics with police officers, right, when they're always working on Welborn Road. I don't care. I think it's since I came to College Station in 1998, they've been working on Welborn Road in some way. It's kind of like I-35. But when you get from 3 lanes down to 2, and there's a sign that says this is going to happen in half a mile, right? I cannot stand it when you have that jerkwad, usually in a jacked up Dodge truck, that comes blaring around you, right, and cutting in front of all the traffic right before you have to merge, when he knew he had to merge a half a mile back, just like we all had to merge a half a mile back, right? But his time is more important than mine. Ooh, can't you tell? This is a bee in my bonnet. So it's that idea that it's not illegal to do that, but that guy's a jerkwad. Right. It's against principles of etiquette. I may think that he's unethical. I may think he's immoral, but really he's not either. He's just breaking principles of etiquette. So as a leader, if you're looking at a situation, you almost have to say, all right, I'm going to take a step back and say, what are the ethics involved? What are the morals involved? And then what are the principles involved? And especially from a leadership point of view in an organization, law usually trumps everything. Right? If it's going to be against the law, you probably shouldn't do it. Even if it's the right thing to do, but organizationally, it could shut down your organization. So that usually trumps it, right? And maybe if you're working for a faith-based organization, maybe religious principles trump the other things. So it's really about that organizational culture on what do you pay attention to first. So a little bit more. So now we broke down some ethics things. Let's talk about some divisions of morality, some words that you've probably heard a lot, but you don't exactly know how they fit into this now, especially with our new, different ways to define things. So when you say amoral, this is having no moral sense. You're indifferent to right or wrong. So you may know the difference, but you don't care. Doesn't matter to you. So sociopaths are an example of this, right? It doesn't register to them. Sometimes it's the fact that they truly don't know the difference between right or wrong. And then sometimes it's the fact that they don't care. My example of this is Casey Anthony. I do know why. I do know why she affected me so much. So this happened back in, I want to say like 2009 and maybe 2008. I don't know. It happened around the time that I was having Cooper, but her daughter would have been the same age as Brenna or like a year younger. So if you don't remember this story, Casey Anthony had a young daughter named Kaylee, and Kaylee went missing, but was not reported missing for a month. And her Casey Anthony, the mom's mom, so the grandma of this little girl, is the one who reported her missing. So when they went to interview the mom, Casey, this woman, she said that a babysitter had her. And then we found out that was a lie. Long story short, she blames her parents for killing the kid and then burying her. Apparently, she drowned in the pool. The parents say they had nothing to do with it, and they actually found evidence that Casey had kept her daughter in the trunk of her car. They say chloroformed while she went out to clubs. I mean, it was a hot mess. This woman, since she was not convicted, she only got 4 years in prison, and that was for lying to the police about the babysitter and some stuff. And she has since, of course, Mom and Dad have been on Lifetime and all sorts of, TLC and all sorts of things telling their story. She has something out, I think on Peacock or one of those other streaming stations, at her side of the story, right? And she still to this day is like, I didn't do anything wrong. Like, I lied and that was wrong. But she blames it on the dad. She's still blaming the dad. So now she's saying the dad abused her. She's saying she had Stockholm syndrome. She's saying all this stuff. I can't believe her, right? I truly believe she's a sociopath. I think she's going to say anything that she feels like she needs to in order to be in society's definition of good and bad, right? That her actions were actually moral. They were actually ethical, but I truly don't know that she knows the difference. And maybe it's because her dad abused her and she had Stockholm syndrome and all the things. I don't know. I don't believe her. But that idea of a sociopath, of course, we've got lots of examples. Again, there's a ton of different documentaries and true crime about sociopaths. But there are people that you meet on a daily basis, maybe even in your office, that are sociopaths. That the only reason why they think something is wrong is because someone has to tell them it's wrong. And that is sometimes a brain chemical issue, which is really intriguing. But to know that they have to take their cues of morality from the outside because they don't have any ethical pinings inside. So their morality is completely constructed by society. It kind of blows your mind, doesn't it? So then there's amoral, and then on the other side, there's non-moral. So there are situations that are just outside of the realm of morality. They don't have anything to do with morality. So it's neither moral or immoral, it just is. If you had heard about the conflict and mediation class over in EHRD, back when Nance Watson taught it, that's how she would open class, was conflict is neither good nor bad, it just is. I loved Nance. Okay, so non-moral is neither moral nor immoral. It just is. So a lot of times these are inanimate objects, right? So I'm sitting here at my desk. You heard my phone go off, right? My phone is a non-moral entity. It is neither moral or immoral. There's a lot of I don't want to say argument, academic discussion about animals. Are animals non-moral? Do they have the reasoning in order to, the moral reasoning? Do they have the ability to have moral reasoning, to have individual ethical character, right? It's a very interesting conversation. But usually when we're talking about the idea of non-moral, it's an idea of it's something you use to do either moral things or immoral things. Most of the time we talk about non-moral objects, it's specifically talking about something that is immoral in action, like the NRA slogan, guns don't kill people, people kill people, right? That is non-moral. They are saying that the gun is non-moral. It's the person that chooses to use it in a bad way that makes it immoral. Make sense? Okay, as we keep going here. Why study ethics and morals in leadership? Why are we talking about this in concurrence with organizational culture? Well, you got to know where your line is. So when we talk about consequential ethics, when we talk about those teleological ethics here, I think it's second. When we talk about that, you've got to know where your line in the sand is. Because as a leader, You're going to be asked to cross that a lot in an organization. You're going to be dictating as a leader in an organization where that line is. You've got to know your values. You've got to be able to talk about it. You've got to be able to talk about your ethical frame, because your organizational culture may differ than the organizational culture even across the hallway. It may, when we talk about those different subcultures within your organization, right? You may personally have an organization that you're involved in that tells you that one thing is right and good, and another organization that's going to tell you something else. And so I think about, my culture as a Christian, evangelical Christian woman, right? That tells me some things about how I should be living my life, depending on denomination, right? But if I have a child that's sick, right? That culture tells me what you do is you stay home, you take care of that child no matter what. But I'm also under the culture of being, at that time, I was an assistant professor when my kiddos were young. And that culture of an assistant professor is you come to work, you teach your classes, it doesn't matter. So many times I had two cultures that I was actively involved in telling me that two different actions were right and two different actions were good. So then I had to make the decision, right? So even internally, we have different organizational cultures that almost fight for that. So you've got to understand how the culture influences the ethics and the ethics influences the culture, and how morality is that combination of the two. So isms, which are ethical theories, right? They help clarify concepts. They help clarify constructs. They help you evaluate where your followers are coming from. They help you figure out, how do you want to live? How ought you live? So there may be one of these isms, these theories that we talk about this week, that you're like, yep, that's me. Or that's what I strive to be. This is what I want to be. So those things are very important to give them names, because when you have names, then you can fully describe that to your followers, to your organization so much better. So when we think about this idea of moral authorities, so who's in charge from a societal point of view or from an organizational point of view, a lot of times they come from all these different categories. So it could be reason, right? These moral authorities could come to their conclusions from thinking, from study, from application. It could be that the idea of what's accepted as good as tradition. Right here at Texas A&M, we do a lot of things that are a little crazy, right? And we love it. And it's because it's tradition, right? We think it's good because it's tradition. If you've ever walked close to the MSC and you see somebody that doesn't know any better walking on the grass in the MSC, right? And you see a core guy taking them out, or a core girl, right? A core person taking them out, the core cadets. There are not many Aggies that would be like, oh, that's inappropriate, we shouldn't do it. Most of the time we're like, heck yeah, take them out, dummy, right? You don't walk on the MSC grass. Okay. So why do we do that? Well, because it's tradition, but also because of history, right? It is historically a memorial. That's why it's called the Memorial Student Center, of the people who have fought and died, the Aggies that have fought and died for us. And so that's why we do it. It's part of our history. It's part of our tradition. That experience comes into play too. And of course, divine revelation. Sometimes your moral authorities come from a religious point of view, or the fact that they have had something explained to them in a way that then they can explain to others. Whew, I know that was a lot. I know this week is going to be a lot. I'm going to try to consolidate as much as I can. Love me where I'm at. Give me some grace, because I'm trying to go through and pick what is the most important things for you to know and be most applicable for this class and for you moving forward as a leader. So I love this quote I found from Pat Schroeder. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. If we use this ethic as a moral compass, then our rendezvous with reality can also become a rendezvous with opportunity. So if you think about the idea that we are trying to make the world a better place from a leadership point of view in any way that we can. We want to do it in a way that is both moral and makes sense for our organization. Cool? All right, I'm excited. Here we go. Ethics.